The storm came not as a gradual shift, but as a malevolent presence, a relentless howl that blotted out the world in a fury of wind and blinding white. Inside his solitary cabin, nestled deep in a valley that felt 1,000,000 miles from anywhere, Elias tended the fire. He was a man shaped by the unforgiving land, his hands calloused from years of hauling wood and mending fences. The crackle of burning pine was his only companion, a familiar rhythm in a life of self-imposed silence. Yet an unfamiliar sound pierced the gale, a thin, desperate cry that was almost immediately swallowed by the storm's monstrous roar. Elias hesitated. The blizzard was a known killer, a force that could strip a man of his life in mere minutes. But the cry, a fragile thread of human despair, pulled at a part of him he had long since buried. With a heavy sigh, he pulled on his coat, thick with wear and insulated with fur, and tugged his hat low over his brow. Grabbing the lantern, he stepped out into the chaotic white. The wind immediately hit him, a physical blow that stole his breath, and the snow bit at his face like 1,000 stinging insects. He pushed forward, the beam of his lantern a small, quivering beacon against the monumental darkness of the wild. He found her huddled against a fallen pine, a small, still figure nearly buried in a fresh drift. Her traditional fur parka was stiff with ice, and her face, a pale canvas against the whiteness, was streaked with frozen tears. She was an indigenous girl, barely a woman, her eyes wide with a profound mix of terror and bone-deep exhaustion. She looked like a lost animal, cornered by a predator it could not outrun. Elias gently scooped her up, feeling the shocking lightness of her body through the thick layers of her frozen clothing. He knew he had to move fast. Her skin was dangerously cold, and her breathing was shallow. He carried her back to the cabin, the storm raging around them, a furious protest against his intrusion. Inside, the cabin's warmth was a gentle assault on her frozen senses. He laid her carefully on his bedroll by the fire, the heat slowly coaxing her back to life. He worked with a quiet, practiced efficiency, carefully removing her stiff, icy parka and wrapping her in a cascade of thick wool blankets. He prepared a simple, warm broth and held the tin cup to her lips. She sipped it with a tremor that ran through her entire body. As she swallowed, her eyes, a deep, beautiful brown, met his. There was no gratitude, no relief, only a profound and haunting fear that felt as tangible as the cold she was shedding. He saw the fear as a clear, unblinking truth. He was a white man, a symbol of a world that had encroached on her people's land, a stranger in their territory. To her, he was likely just as foreign and imposing as the storm itself. He remembered the stories he'd heard from the trappers, the deep, generational distrust between their peoples, the quiet injustices, the unspoken resentments. He knew her fear was not just of him as an individual, but of a history she carried on her young shoulders. It was a weight far heavier than the snow that had almost claimed her. For days, she remained a silent ghost in his home. She moved with a preternatural quietness, her gaze always downcast, her shoulders hunched. Elias tried to talk to her, offering simple questions about her village or her family, but she would only shake her head, her silence a wall between them that he dared not breach. The tension in the small cabin was a living thing, a coiled serpent. He would find her watching him from the corners of her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking, a flicker of something he couldn't name. Was it still fear? Or something else? He felt an unexpected pang of frustration, a desire to explain, to make her understand he was not a threat, that he was merely a man trying to survive, just like her. One morning, the sun broke through the clouds, transforming the world into a dazzling, pristine expanse of pure white. The change in the atmosphere seemed to melt some of the ice from her spirit. Her shoulders, which had been so rigid for days, seemed to relax just a fraction. He motioned for her to follow him outside. She hesitated, her eyes flicking from him to the door, but a moment later she stepped out onto the porch, her breath a white cloud in the crisp, cold air. For the first time, she truly looked at him, not with the wide, terrified stare of a cornered animal, but with a quiet, somber curiosity. Elias had been living here for 10 years, a self-made exile from a past he preferred not to speak of. He'd built this life with his own hands, a life of solitude he had come to cherish. But looking at this young woman, so out of place yet so deeply connected to the land, he felt a strange sense of obligation. He wanted to help her beyond just providing shelter. He wanted the fear in her eyes to vanish, to replace it with a flicker of peace. He knew her name was Anya. She had finally whispered it to him one night, a single fragile syllable of trust that had felt monumental. But the larger question remained. Would she ever see him as anything but a potential danger? He knew the answer wouldn't come easily, if it came at all. The days turned into weeks, and the biting cold of the blizzard gave way to a stunning, frigid beauty. The world outside was a silent, snow-laden tapestry. The tension that had been a constant presence in the cabin began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, comfortable rhythm. Elias, a man of few words, began to teach Anya the ways of his world. He showed her how to track game through the pristine snow, how to set traps for rabbits and foxes, and how to read the subtle signs of the forest. He did not speak much, letting his actions be his guide, showing her a trust he felt she deserved. Anya was a quick and willing student. She moved through the woods with an innate grace, a knowledge of the land that was part of her very being. He saw her smile for the first time when she successfully caught a rabbit in a snare she had set herself. It was a shy, fleeting thing, but it lit up her face, a small flicker of the girl she must have been, before the storm had taken everything from her. Her fear of him began to recede, replaced by a quiet, observant watchfulness. She began helping around the cabin, mending his torn clothes with surprising skill, her fingers nimble and fast. She even ventured out on her own to gather firewood, returning with a sense of quiet pride. The silence between them was no longer a chasm. It had become a bridge, a shared understanding that needed no words. One evening, as the fire crackled, she pointed to a jagged scar on his left hand. "Wolf?" she asked, her voice a soft, musical sound he had not expected to hear. Elias smiled, a rare sight that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "No," he replied, "a stubborn piece of wood." For a moment, they shared a genuine laugh, the sound filling the small space with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. He learned more about her from her actions than from any conversation. She was incredibly strong, carrying heavy bundles of wood without a complaint, her small frame belying an inner resilience. She was resourceful, using things he considered useless to create beautiful and practical tools. He also saw her sadness, a deep melancholy that would cloud her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking, her gaze drifting to the horizon. He knew she was thinking of her family, of her village. He longed to ask her what had happened, but he knew that was a story she had to tell herself in her own time. Their bond grew, forged not in grand declarations, but in shared labor and quiet moments of companionship. He saw her not just as a girl he saved, but as a partner, a true survivor. One afternoon, he found her sitting on a large, snow-covered stump, sketching in the dirt with a stick. It was a drawing of a family, a mother, a father, and a small girl, holding hands. His heart ached with a deep, silent empathy. He knelt beside her, the cold seeping through his knees. "Are they your family?" he asked softly. She nodded, her lips trembling slightly. "Gone," she whispered. The word, a fragile echo. The storm. It took them. The truth hung in the air, heavy and raw. The storm had not only taken her home, but had claimed her entire family. The grief was a fresh wound, still bleeding. Elias reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, a simple gesture of comfort. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned into his touch, a silent acknowledgement of his empathy. The unspoken bond between them solidified in that moment. It was a foundation built on shared grief and a burgeoning trust that transcended the chasm of their different worlds. The fear was gone. In its place, something new was blooming, something fragile but powerful. Elias felt a protectiveness for her that surprised him. She was no longer just a girl he rescued. She was a part of his life, a new beginning in his solitary world. The spring thaws arrived with a quiet promise, bringing with them a new chapter in their shared lives. The snow retreated, revealing the lush green life hidden beneath. Anya began to teach Elias about the medicinal properties of the local plants, a knowledge passed down through generations. She showed him how to identify different berries and herbs, her eyes sparkling with an enthusiasm he had never seen before. He, in turn, showed her how to tend his small vegetable garden, a stark contrast to her wild foraging. Their two worlds, so different, were slowly and beautifully merging, weaving into a single cohesive tapestry. Anya was no longer a silent shadow. Her laughter filled the cabin and the surrounding woods, a joyous sound that made Elias's own heart feel lighter than it had in years. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars come out like scattered diamonds, she finally spoke of her fear. "My people, they say the white man takes what is not his. The land, the life, the spirit. When you found me, I thought you were the storm itself, a final force coming to take what little I had left." Her voice was soft, laced with a pain he couldn't fully comprehend, a history of betrayal that was not his to own. Elias listened, his gaze steady on the vast star-filled sky. "I am not here to take anything, Anya," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I am here because I needed a place to hide, a place to be alone. But now, I am not alone. I don't want to be." He looked at her then, his eyes full of a raw, honest emotion. "I want to be a man who gives, not a man who takes." Enya smiled, a genuine, trusting smile that reached her eyes and banished the last vestiges of her fear. "You already are, Elias. You gave me my life back." She then reached out and placed her hand on his, a small, gentle gesture that spoke volumes. The touch sent a jolt of warmth through him, a feeling he had forgotten existed. The fear was now a distant memory. The bond between them was real, a profound connection built on respect, shared vulnerability, and an understanding that went deeper than words. She was not just a girl he had saved. She was the woman who had saved him from his own solitude, from a life of emotional emptiness. They found a shared language, not of words, but of glances, of quiet touches, of the simple act of being together in the heart of the wild. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, a question, born of a long-held worry, escaped his lips. The storm, the loss, the initial fear. He knew it all still lived within her, a ghost of the past. "Do you still fear me?" he asked, his voice low and uncertain. Anya looked at him, her beautiful brown eyes filled with a love that was pure and unwavering. She did not need to speak. She simply smiled, a smile that conveyed a profound sense of peace and belonging. She placed her hand over his, her touch a silent answer. She had not only overcome her fear, but she had found a new home, a new life, and a love she had never expected. And so had he. The fear had not consumed them. It had brought them together, a testament to the enduring power of human connection in a world that could be both brutal and breathtakingly beautiful. They were two broken pieces, mended together by a force stronger than the Alaskan winter.